Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going deep, like way deep, down to the level of your cells. We're going to be exploring collective intelligence, but not just in like ant colonies.
It really is fascinating. This idea that collective intelligence, it isn't limited to just swarms of animals.
Yeah.
It might be happening inside your body right now at this very moment.
And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today, right? This research paper we're diving into, it argues that our cells are capable of so much more than we give them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine your skin cells making like a group decision to become an eye, or your body ensuring all your organs end up on the correct side. That's the kind of problem solving we're talking about.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So, where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, the paper starts with the concept of intelligence itself. It actually uses philosopher and psychologist William James's definition, the ability to achieve the same goal by different means.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about cells having like a pre-programmed set of instructions.
Mhm.
They can actually adapt and improvise to solve problems in new and unexpected ways.
Exactly. It's about being able to adapt, especially in a constantly changing environment. Imagine if our cells could only develop in one specific way, like any tiny deviation, and boom, catastrophic.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. So this collective intelligence, it gives our cells the flexibility to deal with unexpected challenges and still manage to build a functioning body. But this idea goes way beyond bees and ants,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. We're talking all across biology here. Even single-celled organisms, like bacteria,
Hmm.
they can display collective intelligence.
Really? Bacteria? I always thought bacteria were just like simple little blobs. How can they be
Well,
intelligent?
they may be little, but they can be surprisingly sophisticated, especially when they form these things called biofilms, right?
Biofilms.
Yeah. They basically use these chemical signals to communicate,
Hmm.
like share resources, make collective decisions about how to respond to threats. For example, coordinating the release of toxins to attack competitors. It's really fascinating.
So even at the most basic level of life, there's this incredible ability to cooperate and problem solve.
Exactly.
That's amazing. But how does this play out in more complex organisms like us?
Well, let's start with development. Think about a fertilized egg.
Okay.
It's just a single cell,
Right.
but it somehow manages to transform into a complex organism with, trillions of cells.
That's wild.
Right? It's all about collective intelligence. These early embryonic cells are constantly communicating, dividing, specializing, and it's all in a highly coordinated way.
So it's not just about each cell knowing its job. It's about them working together to achieve this shared goal of building a whole functioning body.
Precisely. This coordination is what ensures that everything ends up in the right place. Can you imagine all your organs like jumbled up or even ending up on the wrong side of your body? That's what could happen if these cells weren't, communicating and cooperating.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty disturbing thought. So this collective intelligence is basically what keeps us from looking like something out of a Picasso painting.
Exactly. It ensures our bodies develop with the correct left and right sides, our limbs, they grow in the right places, and our organs function properly.
Makes sense. But how do these cells know which side is left and which is right? I mean, how is that even possible?
That's a great question. To be honest, it's still a bit of a mystery. But scientists believe that it involves like this combination of genetic cues, bioelectric signals, maybe even the physical flow of fluids within the embryo.
So it's like a symphony orchestra, you know? Each instrument has its own part to play, but they all need to be perfectly synchronized to create a beautiful piece of music. What happens if something goes wrong with this collective intelligence?
That's when we start to see problems. Things like birth defects, developmental disorders, even cancer.
Hold on, cancer. Are you saying cancer is a result of cells like failing to cooperate?
In a way, yeah. Remember when we talked about bacteria using collective intelligence to coordinate, like the release of toxins?
Hmm.
Well, in cancer, it's kind of like cells just stop listening to the body signals and start acting independently, disregarding the normal rules, dividing uncontrollably, and, leading to tumors and spreading.
That's a scary thought. But it also makes sense. I mean, if those cells were still part of the collective, they'd be following the rules, not causing chaos.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why understanding collective intelligence is so important for medicine. Like, if we can figure out how to restore that sense of community in cancerous cells, maybe we can develop treatments that are more targeted and effective.
Now, that's a hopeful thought. Okay, so we've talked about how cells cooperate to build our bodies and how things can go wrong when that cooperation breaks down. But are there other examples of this collective intelligence at play in our bodies? I mean, beyond just development.
Oh, there are tons of fascinating examples. One that's been studied a lot is cell migration.
Cell migration. What's so intelligent about cells moving around?
Oh, it's way more complex than it sounds. Think about, like, wound healing.
Okay.
Cells have to migrate to close that gap and repair the damage. And they need to do this in a coordinated way. Sense their surroundings, communicate with each other, make collective decisions about, which direction to move, when to stop.
So it's like a team of tiny construction workers rebuilding a damaged bridge.
Exactly. And if that coordination breaks down, the wound won't heal properly.
So are you saying that individual cells are, like, thinking about where they need to go? I mean, is that what's happening here?
Well, not about conscious thought in the way we normally think about it. It's more about cells, responding to signals, making decisions based on the inputs. They're constantly evaluating their surroundings, communicating with their neighbors, adjusting their behavior.
Yeah.
It's kind of like distributed intelligence, where the thinking is spread out across this entire cell population.
Okay, so not each cell has its own little brain, but they're all contributing to this collective decision-making process.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
But how do they actually make these decisions? Like, what's the mechanism?
Well, one of the key mechanisms is bioelectricity.
Bioelectricity, like electric currents running through our bodies. I thought that was just for nerve cells.
All cells have this electrical potential across their membranes. And these electrical signals, they can communicate information, control cell behavior, even influence large-scale patterns of development.
So our bodies are like giant electrical circuits.
Pretty much.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But how does bioelectricity actually play a role in, like, cell migration? Cells can sense differences in electrical potential.
Right.
And then they use those differences to guide their movements. Think about it during wound healing. The electrical potential around the wound site, it changes. It's like a beacon, attracting cells to the area that needs repair.
So it's like the electrical signal is saying, hey, we need help over here. Come and fix this.
Exactly. And, bioelectric signaling is involved in a lot of other processes too, like organ formation, regeneration, even cancer suppression.
Wow. It's starting to sound like some kind of sci-fi movie. But if bioelectricity is so important, what happens if those signals, get disrupted?
Well, that's when things can go really wrong. Remember when we were talking about bacteria releasing those toxins in, like, a coordinated attack?
Yeah.
Researchers have actually figured out how to trigger that behavior.
Really?
Yeah, just by disrupting bioelectric signals.
So disrupting these signals can lead to problems like bacterial toxins and even diseases like cancer.
It can. For example, there's evidence that abnormal bioelectric patterns can actually contribute to birth defects and developmental disorders.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the importance of this whole collective intelligence thing, but if it's so crucial to our health, how can we even study it? I mean, it's not like we can just ask ourselves what they're thinking.
True, we can't have a conversation with them. But scientists are using all sorts of techniques to unravel the mysteries of collective intelligence. One of the most powerful ones is optogenetics.
Optogenetics, what is that?
It basically uses light to control the activity of specific cells.
They're using light to, hack into the body's electrical system.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing. And there's another really powerful approach, computational modeling.
Computational modeling. So they're using computers to simulate what's happening in our bodies.
Precisely. By creating these mathematical models of cell behavior, scientists can actually test hypotheses, and make predictions about how collective intelligence works. These models can even help design new experiments and explore potential therapies.
Wow. So they're using computers to understand the power of cells. It really is amazing. We've covered a lot already. I mean, from the idea that intelligence isn't limited to brains, to bacteria acting like a coordinated army, to our bodies being these giant electrical circuits.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And we've only just begun to uncover the mysteries of collective intelligence. There are so many more fascinating examples to discuss, and we've got plenty more. Ready for some even more mind-blowing examples of collective intelligence?
Absolutely. You left me hanging last time with the promise of more. Lay it on me.
All right, let's talk about something you might not expect. Eyes. Well, specifically, how injecting a certain ion channel into frog embryos can make them grow extra eyes.
Wait, extra eyes? Where do they even grow them?
Sometimes it's on their legs, and they even have been found growing on their gut.
On their gut?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? What's fascinating is that it's all about how those injected cells send out bioelectric signals. They're basically saying, hey, let's build an eye here.
And the other cells just go along with it.
Yeah. The neighboring cells actually start cooperating. They join this whole eye-building project, even though they weren't originally programmed to do so.
So those neighboring cells, they're picking up on those signals and they're changing their behavior to join the team.
Exactly. It just shows you how powerful these bioelectric signals can be in shaping an organism's development. It's a great example of how cells are always sensing their surroundings, communicating with each other, and making collective decisions on how to respond.
It really is incredible. Speaking of sensing and responding, what about planetary regeneration? Those tiny flatworms can regrow their entire bodies from just a fragment, right?
Exactly. Cut them into dozens of pieces, and each one will regenerate into a whole new worm.
That's amazing. How does that even work? Do the cells just automatically know what's missing and start growing the missing parts?
It's a little more complex than that. Think about it. Let's say you cut a planaria in half.
Okay.
The cells on either side of the cut, they have to figure out which side needs a head and which needs a tail.
Right, but those cells were right next to each other before the cut, so how do they know?
That's where the collective intelligence comes in. The cells have to communicate, figure out their location in relation to the rest of the fragment, and then they make a collective decision about what to build. Imagine a team of architects rebuilding a skyscraper after a disaster.
Oh, I see.
They've got to figure out what's left, what needs to be added, and how to make it all fit together perfectly.
So the cells are actively problem solving, not just blindly following some genetic blueprint. What about those cryptic planaria you mentioned earlier, the ones where the bioelectric signals are disrupted? What happens to them?
Cryptic planaria are fascinating because researchers have figured out how to manipulate the bioelectric signals to make them regenerate heads, but like randomly. So sometimes they grow one head, sometimes two, and sometimes a head will just pop up in a completely unexpected place.
So they could end up with a head on their tail.
It's totally possible.
That's wild. So even when the outcome is unpredictable, they're still working together, right?
Yeah, exactly. They make a decision and they stick to it. It's never a situation where, like, some cells are building a head and others are building a tail. They all agree on the same outcome.
That's amazing. So are there other examples of this, collective intelligence at play, but in systems that aren't constantly regenerating?
Of course.
Yeah.
Take the segmentation clock, for example. This is a biological clock that controls the formation of segments in our bodies, like the vertebrae in our spines.
A clock? Is there literally a clock ticking away inside of us?
Well, not a clock in the traditional sense. It's more like this rhythmic pattern of gene expression that controls the timing and spacing of those segments.
to make sure our bodies develop with the correct segmentation. But how does this clock thing demonstrate intelligence? I mean, is it just following instructions?
Not at all. What's remarkable is this clock is incredibly resilient and adaptable. Like, scientists have done experiments where they drastically change the shape of the developing tissue. And that segmentation clock, it just keeps on ticking. It adjusts its rhythm and patterns to make sure it gets that correct number and spacing.
So it's not blindly following rules. It's more about adapting to unexpected changes and still managing to achieve that perfectly segmented body.
Exactly.
That's pretty incredible. So do individual cells have some internal timer then to tell them when to divide and form segments?
It's not really about individual cells having timers. It's more like this network of cells communicating and synchronizing their activity. Scientists have even grafted cells that were out of sync with the clock into host tissue that was already oscillating. And guess what happened?
What?
Those out of sync cells, they synchronized with their new neighbors.
Wow, that's really amazing. So they sensed the rhythm of their neighbors and adjusted their own behavior to match. It really shows how adaptable these cells are.
It does.
Okay, so we've talked about cells working together in really complex organisms. What about something much, much smaller, like bacteria?
Bacteria. Even these tiny organisms exhibit some incredible collective behaviors.
Wait, I thought we were talking about collective intelligence. Aren't bacteria single-celled?
They are, but even they can be surprisingly complex. Think about biofilms.
Biofilms, those slimy layers of bacteria.
Exactly. They're actually highly organized communities. They have these specialized roles, sophisticated communication systems.
So like a microscopic city of bacteria all working together.
Exactly.
But how do they communicate?
They use something called quorum sensing. Basically, bacteria release chemical signals that allow them to, count how many other bacteria are around them.
Wait, bacteria can count?
Not in the way that we think about counting. They can detect the concentration of those chemical signals. So that lets them know how big their population is. And once that population reaches a certain threshold, boom, they activate specific genes and change their behavior. but they do it as a group.
So once they reach a quorum, they can, like, vote on what actions to take.
You can think of it that way.
That's amazing. What kind of actions are we talking about here?
Oh, they could do some pretty incredible things. Like some bacteria use quorum sensing to coordinate the production of bioluminescence.
Bioluminescence, that's like the ability to produce light, right?
Right. Others use it to coordinate the release of toxins that can attack their hosts or competitors. It's like a microscopic army launching a synchronized attack.
Okay, that's incredible. But are you saying that bacteria are, like, consciously planning their actions?
It's not really about conscious thought as we understand it, right? It's about them being able to sense their environment, communicate, make decisions as a group. This distributed intelligence, it allows them to adapt and thrive.
So even simple organisms can exhibit really complex, sophisticated behavior. It's pretty amazing. But what's even more mind-blowing is that recent research has shown that bacteria can even exhibit a form of memory.
It's not memory in the traditional sense. They're not storing specific memories like we do.
Okay.
But they can be conditioned to respond to certain stimuli in a way that suggests they've learned from past experiences.
So maybe not full-blown memories, but they can learn and adapt. That's really impressive. Okay, so we've seen all these incredible examples of collective intelligence in bacteria, cells, regenerating flatworms. But why should we care? What's the big deal?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is that it really challenges how we think about intelligence. For so long, we've associated intelligence with things like language, reasoning, complex thought. But what we're seeing with collective intelligence is that it can manifest in all sorts of ways, even without a central brain.
So intelligence isn't just about having a big brain. It's about being able to solve problems and achieve goals through coordinated action.
Exactly.
That's pretty profound, and it sounds like this has some pretty big implications.
Oh, absolutely. It changes how we think about the evolution of intelligence, the nature of consciousness, even the possibility of creating artificial intelligence.
Wow. But are there any, like, more practical applications to understanding collective intelligence?
Oh, tons. Take biofilms, for example. If we can understand how they form and communicate, maybe we can develop new ways to prevent infections, or even use bacteria to clean up environmental pollutants.
So it's not just about the basic science, it's about using that knowledge to solve real-world problems.
Exactly. That's what makes this field so exciting.
It's been a wild ride so far. From those synchronized cells during development and regeneration to the communication systems of bacteria, it's clear that even simple life forms can be incredibly complex, and understanding this behavior could lead to some major advancements. What else is there?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the potential for this collective intelligence to change medicine, technology, even how we understand ourselves.
So we've explored all these amazing examples of collective intelligence in bacteria, cells, regenerating flatworms. It's clear that even simple life forms can be incredibly complex. And understanding their behavior, it could lead to some really major advancements in all kinds of fields.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how this collective intelligence could potentially change medicine, technology, and even how we understand ourselves. One of the most exciting areas is medicine. I mean, just imagine, right? Harnessing the collective intelligence of our cells to repair tissues, regrow organs, or even like fight diseases like cancer.
Okay, now that's the kind of future I can get behind. But how would that even work?
We'll think about those planaria we were talking about.
Yeah.
They can regenerate entire body parts, right?
Right.
We can figure out how they do that, how those cells communicate and coordinate to achieve that level of regeneration. Then maybe we can unlock those abilities in our own bodies.
So instead of relying on organ transplants or artificial implants, we could potentially, like, trigger our bodies to regrow damaged tissues or even entire organs.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's not just regeneration. If we can understand how those bioelectric signals work, we might be able to actually reprogram cells to behave differently. Imagine being able to target those signals to prevent tumor growth or even reverse the effects of aging.
That does sound pretty futuristic, but let's be realistic. How far away are we from actually achieving those kinds of medical breakthroughs?
It's tough to say for sure, but this field is moving forward really quickly. Scientists are making a lot of progress understanding how cells communicate and coordinate. And new tools, like optogenetics and computational modeling, they're giving us this much deeper understanding of how collective intelligence works.
So it's not just some pipe dream. There's real potential here.
Absolutely. And it's not just medicine either. Understanding collective intelligence could have a huge impact on technology, too. Like, think about swarm robotics.
Swarm
Yeah,
robotics.
the idea of creating these swarms of tiny robots that can all work together to solve complex problems.
Oh, okay, yeah. So instead of programming each robot individually, you could design them to communicate and coordinate with each other, just like, cells in a body. That's a really cool idea.
Right. And these swarms could be used for all sorts of things. Search and rescue operations, environmental monitoring, even like exploring other planets. The possibilities are kind of endless.
That is getting pretty futuristic, but
Ah.
isn't there a risk that those intelligent systems could, get out of control? I've seen enough sci-fi movies to be a little wary.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And it's something researchers are taking very seriously. As we develop these intelligent systems, it's crucial to build in safeguards, ethical guidelines to ensure that they're being used responsibly.
It's good to know that people are thinking about those risks. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about like the philosophical implications of collective intelligence. You mentioned earlier that it challenges our traditional view of intelligence. Can you say more about that?
I think it makes us really reconsider what we even mean by intelligence, right? We've always associated intelligence with things like language, reasoning, abstract thought, but collective intelligence suggests that it can take many different forms.
So it's not just about having a big brain, it's about the ability to solve problems and achieve goals through coordinated action.
Exactly. And this raises some really interesting questions about consciousness. I mean, if groups of cells can exhibit intelligence, does that mean they're also conscious in some way?
Wow. Yeah. That's a big one. It really makes you think about like where do you draw the line between simple organisms and, those that are more complex.
And it also makes you wonder, if collective intelligence is so common in nature, maybe our own intelligence actually evolved from these simpler forms of cellular cooperation. Maybe our brains are just like highly evolved versions of those bacterial biofilms we were talking about.
That's a pretty amazing thought. It kind of suggests that we're not so different from those seemingly simple organisms after all.
Exactly. It's this idea that we're all part of this continuum of intelligence,
Hmm.
from the smallest bacteria to the most complex brains.
That's both humbling and inspiring at the same time. It really makes you realize that life itself is just this incredible display of collective intelligence.
It really is. And it reminds us that there's still so much we don't know about the natural world. We're only just beginning to understand the mysteries of collective intelligence.
So, what are some of the big questions that still need to be answered?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to take what we know about collective intelligence and actually put it into practice. How can we use bioelectricity to develop new medical treatments? How can we design intelligent robots that work together effectively? And how can we make sure those technologies are developed and used responsibly?
Those are some big questions. But it feels like we're on the verge of some pretty incredible breakthroughs. I mean, the field of collective intelligence might be young, but it really has the potential to change how we understand life, technology, and even ourselves.
I totally agree. It's a really exciting time to be exploring this area of science.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into collective intelligence. It's been a wild ride. We've seen how cooperation and communication between cells can create incredible complexity, adaptability, even intelligence. From the tiniest bacteria to the most complex brains, this phenomenon is everywhere.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's still so much more to discover. So the next time you see an ant colony, a flock of birds, even just your own skin, remember that there's this whole hidden world of collective intelligence at work, constantly communicating, coordinating, and creating the amazing tapestry of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.